StarFleet Academy is the first time I've ever watched a full episode of Star Trek. And now I've watched a whole season. Yeah, I know, put your pitchforks down. How could this be possible? I've seen Sanctuary. I've seen Lex. You see, Star Trek was my dad's show. He's a Trekkie. But I'm cooler than my dad. I grew up watching Stargate instead because it had P90s and a naked lady in the first episode. That's not to say I don't know about Star Trek though. I've walked past plenty of episodes playing on the TV throughout my life, and I've watched plenty of stuff about Star Trek. So with the new hit show that IGN gave an 8 out of 10, I thought now was the best time to start. I love sci-fi, so how bad could this possibly even be? Oh, that's quite the promo photo. But that's okay. I've watched plenty of CW shows in my time, and even some big budget ones that look like they were shot for the CW. But before I can even press play, it's pretty hard to ignore the noise online and the large-eyed thumbnails screaming about how bad it is, and the rebuttal from those that love it shouting, "It's not for you." Well, that's good, because if it's not for hardcore Star Trek fans, then maybe it's for me. According to the showrunner Alex Kurtzman, it's like Hogwarts in space. A science fiction show changing its genre and target audience to pull in younger, newer fans isn't a new thing. Doctor Who had the Sarah Jane adventures and the more teenage-focused Class. Star Wars has the Clone Wars and even Young Jedi, so I can't hold that against it. All it needs to be is successful at what it sets out to be. Hogwarts in space may sound a bit cringe, but it's a decent premise for a spin-off with a weekly format. To succeed at this, it'll need a few things that every show like this has, and then we can judge how well it does at each section. Our ingredients list. A boy who lived and his letter. A core group of students that each have unique skills and deficiencies they need to overcome. A school-based mystery or conspiracy. And an overarching plot to pull you from week to week. So the premise of StarFleet Academy is both good and bad if you're a newcomer like myself. We open on some narration telling us that an event called the Burn had occurred, and they show us a big explosion in space, so I can only assume something very bad happened. Will this show be set in a sort of post-apocalypse space thing, kinda like Firefly? The next few scenes with our protagonist Caleb Meir as a child losing his mother to a very dark and controlling feeling Starfleet certainly made me think so, until about 15 minutes in, where the Admiral says to Nalarake,
"Now that the burn is finally behind us, it's time to rebuild."
Okay, a huge universe-changing event happened, but that's all behind us now, and won't really affect the plot, which is pretty whiplashy for newcomers, but I suppose explains the timeline and status quo for long-time fans. The main takeaway is that Starfleet Academy is rebuilding from scratch, and this really only serves as a reason for them to accept a bunch of underqualified and frankly quite terrible students.
I think I swallowed my combat.
And to have an unconventional school principal. Also, it lets them do way too many COVID allegories.
Now these kids are inheriting a broken world they did not create but have to clean up.
We maintain stringent boundaries around our children.
So they put up that psionic wall around their planetary system and stayed behind it. The traditional paths to Starfleet disappeared for many of these kids, sir.
It's all just a bit of flavor, I guess, since a new school year means new students anyway, so they would always be a new group of fish all out of water. Our lead character is Caleb Meir, whom we met in the intro as a child who gets separated from his mother because of the Big Bad Federation. Caleb grew up as an orphan going in and out of prison, constantly searching for his lost mother and becoming a badass fighter and brilliant hacker. Just your typical everyday 6'2" ripped 21-year-old college student. Caleb seems like a decent lead when we first meet him. He's grown up outside the system and without rules, so in theory, forcing him to join Starfleet Academy can lead to a lot of conflict as he learns to fit in. But the problems start to arise when we look at his journey throughout the season. Basically, Caleb is a Gary Stu.
There's nothing you can teach me that I don't already know about temporal mechanics.
Where other protagonists have a balance of things they're good and bad at, Jack O'Neill is a great leader and tactician under pressure, but he has no patience for science or diplomatic squabbles. Harry Potter is incredibly brave and the chosen one, but he's terrible at everything else except Quidditch. However, Caleb here is a self-taught tech genius hacker, hand-to-hand combatant, pilot, and master debater. But there is one thing he's bad at: friendship. Until he's immediately good at it, and then he gets a girlfriend in episode 2. So the reason Caleb joined Starfleet in the first place is because the school dean, Nala Ake, promises him that she and the resources of Starfleet will help him find his mum. This here will be the season's driving force and Caleb's reason to stay at the academy. Until she doesn't, and then he seemingly forgets about her most episodes. Whenever it seems like Caleb can't do something, he simply whips out this show's magical bullshit nanites called programmable matter, which is a magical goop that can become anything from a USB drive to a spaceship part. Basically, it's the sonic screwdriver, but dumber. Okay, Now that we have our lead and his reason to be in the plot, we need our breakfast club, our Scooby Gang, our Team Flash, our gang. A core group of characters that each have unique personalities and skills that complement, or in some cases contrast with the rest of the team. They must bring something to the table to justify their inclusion, and bonus points if they have a recognizable silhouette. Take Team Avatar for instance, where each member is not only a different element, but that also matches their personality and skills. People watch TV for characters. No matter how good the plots are, if the characters aren't interesting, then a show will fail. This is a section I thought the show would easily nail. I mean, it's built into the DNA of the show, right? The members of a Star Trek crew each have different jobs, and each job needs a different skill set. So you've got predefined roles to fill. I've always viewed Star Trek as the thinking man sci-fi, and I've heard it called competency porn, where it's basically just a bunch of people being really good at their job. So this should be easy. Let's see what Starfleet Academy does. Let's start with Genesis. Genesis is the daughter of a Starfleet captain, so she has been groomed for the Academy her whole life.
My father's a Starfleet admiral.
Which is why I'm putting your name up for the pre-command track.
For captain's track.
You will never measure up to your father, the Admiral.
She is a natural leader, genius hacker, hand-to-hand combatant, sharpshooter, and pilot. That's right, she does everything Caleb does, but better. Functionally, having a character that's better than your lead in every way is a bad idea, but it can at least lead to some interesting conflict, like how Aaron Sun and John Crichton are equals in a lot of ways, yet are both equally broken. They're two puzzle pieces that fit perfectly together. In comparison, Genesis and Caleb are just two identical pieces from different boxes. They do have a bit of a steamy meet cute in episode 1 that establishes a will they won't they, which is critical for this kind of show. But the writers abandon this completely by episode 2 when they give Caleb a girlfriend, and then they don't really even return to it until like 3 minutes in episode 8. Every friend group needs a class clown, right? A Sokka, a Ron Weasley. So this show has Darren Raimi, and he's some kind of fish alien, but he never needs water. In fact, the one time we go to one of his people's moons, it's a barren desert. You know he's an alien though, because he shouts, "I'm Kyonian, bitch."
Oh, I'm the first Kyonian to make it to Starfleet.
I'm Kyonian, bitch.
You're Kyonian, bitch!
3 times in the first episode. Also, he's pansexual and he vomits glitter, but those are only ever used for cheap, tell your sister I said hi jokes.
Say that to your sister. Say that to your sister. Say that to your sister.
But beyond being the butt of most of the show's jokes, he's also a natural leader, a genius hacker, hand-to-hand combatant, sharpshooter, and pilot. Wait, why does that sound familiar? Anyway, in episode 1, he is Draco Malfoy, and he's a real dick. He does continue to be a dick for most of the show, and is somehow both popular and unpopular. However, he stops being a meaningful antagonist to Caleb after they become roommates and he joins the group. And then the War College jocks take that spot. He is written as a pretty stereotypical dude bro, who is more obsessed with himself than any of his conquest women. We know this because he works out with his LED skipping rope while listening to music on his LED earbuds, because it's the future, and the future is paved with tiny lights. That's 3 functionally identical characters, so the show decides to mix things up by giving us Jay Den, a Klingon whose main trait is that he's the opposite of a Klingon in every way. I do in fact know what a Klingon is, but if I didn't, the show does make sure to tell us constantly how aggressive and warmongering they are, despite Jay Den being the only actual example we have of one. He's a sweet boy with stage fright that doesn't want to do war, but instead wants to be a medic. Honestly, it feels like a pretty lazy character idea to just have an angry species be nice. The good version of this trope would be Kar Dargo from Farscape. As a Luxon, rage is part of his DNA, and he has to actively struggle against his own nature to be a deeply romantic musician and loving father. Jay Den isn't that at all though. Jay Den is kind by nature, despite his upbringing and family. This makes him boring as he's surrounded by people that know him for him and don't expect him to be anything else. They do try to explore his inner turmoil in his focus episode, but it rings hollow because throughout the season we see him picking and choosing what parts of Klingon culture he wants to follow, like a horny Christian girl. He won't get in a fight, but he will only eat pepperoni that died in a fair fight, despite said pepperoni being replicated by the magic food box anyway. Ceres Acclamation Mill is a genius hacker, oh goddammit. But wait, she's also an incredibly confusing, nonsensical holographic life form with the intelligence of a supercomputer and the brain of a 17-year-old. It's kinda dumb, but that also makes her the most interesting character in the entire show. Not so much in a plot capacity, mind you, since she's OP as fuck and can become selectively intangible to avoid laser fire. She can teleport anywhere she wants because she seemingly has no hologram emitter, and her brain is somewhere, I guess. Sam also breathes out underwater sometimes. Plot-wise, she is the first of her kind to be sent by a race of holographic beings that were created by Starfleet, but then abandoned for some reason, and they don't want to be slaves anymore, so Sam is here to find out if Starfleet are cool. She's extremely quirky and pretty annoying, but relatively harmless. Because she's so over the top, she's useful for counteracting Caleb's incessant misery, and gives a sort of reluctant giving in to her requests for friendship. She gets some semblance of an arc that comes to a head during her focus in episode 8, so we'll talk about that when we get there. My preference would be to keep the crew at a tight 5, so they can all get an opportunity to develop and grow throughout the season, but 3 of our 5 are so similar, why not add 2 extras that we can also underdevelop? Ancillary characters aren't a bad thing, but they have to stand out. Think Seamus Finnegan blowing himself up all the time, or Neville Longbottom standing up for himself, getting that standout moment. But once again, Starfleet Academy drops the ball by giving us 2 Betazoids, which are aliens that look like humans, but they're also separated from Starfleet after the burn, and they're kinda telepathic, empathic, when it occasionally suits the plot. Betazoid 1 is Tarima, and she is Caleb's girlfriend for most of the show when she isn't playing hard to get. She's not like other Betazoids though, because her psychic powers are so strong and powerful that her father and brother are scared of her, so they have to hold back her potential using an invasive implant. But fear not, for she will break free of her bonds and use her psionic banshee scream to murder 7 alien Batmen. Oh, also she has a brother, but he's so bland I can't tell you anything about him even after 10 episodes, except he's kind of in love with Sam, who is technically 4 months old. I know I called the Betazoids ancillary characters, but there's also 4 teachers that somewhat exist too. There's the Doctor from that other Star Trek show, and he's a 1,000-year-old hologram, but not like Sam is a hologram, but he can still touch things. He's pompous and he pontificates. There's Tig Notaro, who plays Tig Notaro. She calls herself a rare nerd-jock hybrid.
I'm a nerd-jock hybrid.
And she has a really tropey teaching method of repeating the current situation's problem to the students, and then going, and... which makes the students magically figure out the answer. Bingo!
Bingo.
Because she's the smartest and bestest, and randomly at one point says she time traveled 1,000 years into the future and is 200 years old. So I've no idea if she's human or what's even going on there.
You tell me.
And then in a surprise, we have her wife as the only other teacher we meet. This is Lura Thok, who I called Blue Klingon in all my notes, because I think she's half Klingon, half other angry blue alien, and she yells a lot and says how she is angry and wants to die in battle.
The victory is light. Today is a good day to die.
But mostly she just makes pretty decent puns and is a lesbian.
They shenaned once, they'll shenan again.
The final actually important character that I probably should have talked about earlier, because she potentially has more screen time than Caleb, is the school dean, Nala Ake. Nala is the actual reason the whole show's plot kicks off, since she's the Federation officer that locked up Caleb's mother and separated them before the resourceful young scallywag stole her comm badge and used it to escape into the wilderness. So a comm badge is like a keycard, but this is also the only time this happens in the show.
I think I swallowed my comm badge.
Anyway, Nala felt so bad about separating a boy from his mother that she quit the entire Starfleet and basically exiles herself to go work at a daycare until we skip forward 15 years and the Admiral stops by to offer her both a job as the Dean of the new Academy and a reunion with Caleb. This all sounds pretty interesting on paper, until you find out that this all happens in the first 10 minutes of the show, and then she stays completely stagnant for the rest of the season. Also, she's 400 years old. It's weird, because they've made all of these teachers so much older, and it just makes them more boring, because it means they know everything and are always right. Nala's main quirk is that she's Quentin Tarantino's dream girl and refuses all footwear, and gets those dogs as close to the camera as often as she can. If she only did this in the confines of her quarters, it would tell us that she likes to relax outside the strict responsibilities of being the captain of the Athena and in charge of the Academy. Instead, she does it absolutely everywhere, and she just comes across as lazy and disrespectful. Even when she enters the quarters of her biggest rival, the War College General, she just splays herself out all over his couch. She's not a kooky Dumbledore, despite her vague ramblings and hints to the students. Most episode plots are split between what the kids are doing and what Nala is doing, which is often very little. So as thin and uninteresting as they are, we at least have all our characters. Now we just need something for them to do. In Farscape, Crichton wants to get home. As far as I know, just like Torchwood, Warehouse 13 and Stargate, the other Star Trek shows exist because it's just them doing their jobs. StarFleet Academy though is going for Hogwarts in space, which means while the kids are all going to school, they have to face threats from both within and without. Harry Potter and other school-based ensemble shows like Gen V or Riverdale have a core mystery within the school itself that unravels throughout the season as the students investigate between classes and while dealing with the weekly dramas. They're also usually being thwarted by the teachers that are either complicit or ignorant. This would normally tie into the season arc, but Academy's season arc is Caleb trying to find his mum, occasionally, when he remembers, and isn't too busy kissing girls. So his goal is entirely external and has nothing to do with any of the other students, and it doesn't affect anyone but himself. The teachers aren't even getting in the way, they're actively helping him, and apparently Nala is using every resource available. So in the meantime, Caleb just has to go to school and wait for his mum to turn up. At least in episode 1, he puts everyone in danger by sending a message to her. Episode 2, he trades giving a cute girl a tour for telescope time to look for her, even though Nala should have already allowed this. But then he does nothing and makes no progress towards the lack of mystery that is his mother's whereabouts until the 9th episode, where Sam figures out that he just had his email filter set wrong and his mum had actually been trying to send him messages the whole time. And she even included her location for the big finale. Heck, even CW Flash knew they could get you to come back next week with a stinger showing that Harrison Wells didn't actually need his wheelchair. StarFleet Academy has no sense of progression most episodes, because the whole thing takes place within a school, and there's no traditional holidays. You can't even tell how far through the year they are, or even how much time has passed, and you definitely don't get a sense of progression by how much Caleb is improving in his studies, because he was already a perfect genius from the start. So if the students aren't solving a mystery or learning new skills in class, what the hell are they even doing? The answer? Tropey college shit mostly. To break it down, they spend the season split between 3 things. The aforementioned college tropes, some high school relationship drama, and then suddenly, high-stakes, galaxy-ending terrorism plots. Yeah, you heard that right, but first, let me tell you about the college tropes. So the Federation is still supposedly rebuilding after the massive catastrophe that was the burn, and the War College has continued to train its cadets the whole time, but Starfleet has decided to begin completely anew with rookie first years, so it's a bit odd that instead of elite training or anything that would appropriately prepare them for the galactic adventures, we end up getting lazy sci-fi versions of babysitting an egg, laser tag, a prank war, and a debate club. I'm gonna highlight the most egregious of each type of episode to give you an idea of what I've been through. The prank war and laser tag actually both take place in episode 3, and it really does stand out as one of the most ridiculous. It works as our proper introduction to the War College, which is functionally just a rival frat house of aggressive dude bros instead of an elite wartime force trained to bring the galaxy back from the brink of destruction. I guess everyone in the world of Star Trek are just dumber and more childish this far in the future. Like Idiocracy. Maybe all the best and brightest died when the burn made all the ships blow up. The 3 main war frat bros are actually 3 alien races that I recognize. There's the angry Romulan that disappears after episode 5, the actually pretty cool Vulcan that dies in one of the better episodes, and a guy named Kyle that becomes Jaden's boyfriend. It turns out that the War College actually shares the Athena with Starfleet. They're just across the atrium. However, they only actually show up in like 3 of the episodes. Caleb's girlfriend Tarima originally joins the War College, but since they're just next door, they still hang out all the time, and then she's just reassigned to Starfleet anyway. The prank war episode is mostly focused on Genesis and Darum, and really highlights just how similar they are to Caleb. Laser tag in this universe is actually an incredibly tactical sport called Calica that they play in the Danger Room from X-Men 3. Genesis and Darum both want to be the captain of the Calica team, so they spend time on a pissing contest to see who's better, and turns out Darum is, until they get into a real battle and then he becomes a big dumb idiot and she shows him how a real captain does it. You'd think this would give her a solid role like I've been asking for, and make her the captain of the group for all future events, but nope. Just once for about 30 seconds in the finale where she just says she needs to pee.
I think I have to pee.
The reason they get into this prank war turned laser tag battle in the first place is because the war fraternity hijacks the teleport system and beams our heroes all around the campus in their underwear. Yes, the hologram wears underwear. She also tells us that they get stuck in her butt.
Before I even put my underwear on my butt.
This is also the moment where Sam breathes out air underwater, which is so confusing for no reason, and they had to go through so many layers of production with either no one noticing or no one caring. Nala spends this one doing her best Dumbledore impression, teaching the kids to raise empathy flowers, that the kids eventually used to win the prank war, and she just sits there winking as if this was her grand plan all along, to teach the kids the empathy to win wars, which in this case is breeding giant mutant plants to attack rival students in a petty prank war. If this didn't make the War College look foolish enough already, we then meet their dean. I would have assumed the dean of a war college in a post-catastrophe galaxy would be someone like Michael Ironside's Raxac in Starship Troopers. The Federation has gone from like 300 planets down to like 30, so lawlessness should be running rampant. Yet what we get is a tea-obsessed school vice principal that has more in common with Principal Skinner, and Nala embarrasses him in every appearance he makes. If the show isn't written for old Star Trek fans, then I sure hope the new fans are really into teenage drama, because that's the next third of what they spend their time doing. Caleb starts the show as a hardened criminal, but the moment he meets Terima, he becomes an edgeless 13-year-old going on aquarium dates to look at CGI whales. They have zero chemistry, and try to tell us the one thing they have in common is that they both want to be free, except they both immediately submit to staying at the Academy permanently. They're worse than Barry and Iris from CW Flash. They flip-flop on a dime from soulmates to hatred, like one time during an awkward and far too long sex scene, Terima's telepathy accidentally lets her see him as a scared kid, so he lashes out, and then they're moody for the rest of the episode. Episode 2, she thinks he betrays him, it's everywhere. The Fishboy gets the least drama, except for the filler episode where he almost gets an arranged marriage to a princess from his homeworld, and then Jay Den gets mad at him for abandoning Starfleet, even though you'd think being a king to all of his people would take precedence over maybe becoming a jobber on a spaceship. But Jay Den somehow wins that argument, and then they make goo-goo eyes at each other. Oh, also they use a portal to get all the way from Starfleet Academy on Earth to Fishboy's moon, which completely negates the need for starships, especially in this post-burn era, and then they try to explain this massive narrative lapse with some sci-fi word salad, saying, the planet's core has stopped spinning, which makes it okay apparently. When my Star Trek friend saw this, he put a phaser in his mouth, and it was not set to stun. Fishboy learns he can forge his own path instead of the one chosen for him by his fish race. Genesis doesn't want to live in the shadow of her father, so through massive contrivances, she tries to destroy her entire career to delete a reference letter that says she's her own worst enemy. She learns that she can forge her own path irrespective of her father. Jaden's focus ep shows his sad origin story where his family hates him because all he wants to do is join Starfleet as a doctor, but we find this out during a high school debate club episode. I get that part of the job in Starfleet is negotiations, so I would give them props for it, but Jaden spends the whole time having stage fright-fueled panic attacks, which again is just his whole thing, is just him being the opposite of his race. Wow, so smart. Also, they're debating if Klingons should be offered an asylum planet by the Federation, which seems like a dumb topic, and none of the arguments are interesting. It's no community man is evil moment.
Man is evil!
Anyway, apparently it's wrong if you give them a planet because of their culture, but if you trick the big dumb Klingons into thinking they won the planet, then that's morally correct. The lesson he learns here is that he can choose his own path without disrespecting his culture. Sam actually gets something interesting to do if you can get past the Lizzie McGuire fourth wall breaking and Disney Channel drawing on the screen. She spends her focus episode having an existential crisis and giving the class and the viewer a storybook recap on Benjamin Sisko, who I know is from Deep Space Nine, but Sam now tells me that he loved baseball, punched a god in the face, and then later became a god himself. What? I'm sure this makes perfect sense if you're a Deep Space Nine fan, but to a newcomer like me, this just sounds insane. And it's not just a small reference either, the entire episode focuses on it, and Sam bases her entire arc on it because Sisko was also an envoy apparently. The problem is the entire episode really is just a fake history lesson featuring a Netflix documentary with Sisko's fake son, and Sam blatantly comparing herself to Sisko, subtext be damned. Anyway, it culminates in the entire crew going on a field trip to Sisko's old watering hole that for some reason looks like a modern day dive bar, where Caleb hacks Sam's base code and sets her to drunk mode, and then absolute cringe ensues. She ultimately learns that she can forge her own unique path as an envoy. Sensing a theme here. But somehow her character arc gets even lazier later in the season. When Sam starts fatally glitching, the show decides the only cure is childhood resilience, because she was somehow programmed to be 17, but they gave her no memories and no childhood, and this causes her processors to overload. Instead of actually developing her character, they take her to a magical black and white simulation where time moves differently, so the holographic doctor can raise her for 17 years and instantly become her surrogate dad. It is a massive narrative shortcut that replaces genuine growth with an artificial time jump. She emerges with a completely new childhood, but the exact same personality, entirely unaltered. And what are the rest of the cadets doing while she's out there fighting for her life? They're forced to perform the play Our Town. Because is it really a sci-fi story if it doesn't use a 1,000-year-old theatre play to heavy-handedly mirror what the characters are going through? This allows the showrunners to pad the runtime with public domain theatre recitals instead of writing original dialogue. It is a masterclass in stalling the plot, and is so wanky. Also, the theatre teacher in this episode is from the same Discovery show as Tig Notaro, and she also travelled through time, but they still won't elaborate on this, and they treat it like it's just a reunion between them. I know Star Trek isn't known for its action, but we finally arrive at the season arc portion of what they all get up to. This covers a grand total of 3 episodes, and they're probably the best of the season. Apart from Caleb's sometimes search for his mum, the main season arc involves Noose Braca, played by Paul Giamatti. Noose is a scenery-chewing, origami chicken-folding man-baby. He's the real reason Caleb's mum went to prison, and acts as the season's big bad, being a foil both to Holly Hunter and Caleb. He calls himself a freedom fighter, but the show treats him like an evil, insane person, and he also does act like one. However, he does spew some rhetoric that doesn't sound so bad, like utopia is just colonization, and hey, maybe poor people shouldn't starve to death. But remember, he's the bad guy, and replicators are for shooting in games of laser tag, and not for feeding the poor. At the end of episode 1, Noose uses a message that Caleb sent to his mother to track the Athena, and then commandeer it using viral programmable matter. Hey, that's cause and effect. They really gave me false hope in this pilot episode. The promise of the premise actually continues to deliver in this one when the cadets all work together doing specific tasks to thwart Paul Giamatti's evil plan to steal the warp core. Seems insane that like 6 guys can just remove and transport a spaceship's magical drive? Like, imagine removing the boosters from a rocket. Whatever. You do have to suspend your disbelief during this section though, because it's still not well written. Sure, each cadet does have a task to do, but each of these tasks is so contrived to perfectly fit the skills that they each have. But what's worse is that we don't even know that most of them have these skills until they're presented with the issue at hand. For instance, Caleb needs a sample of the programmable matter from the ship's hull, so Genesis says she'll go get it, but then the blue Klingon says that spacesuits can only be gotten by teachers and she's currently stabbed so can't go. But then Darum says, don't worry, I can spacewalk without a suit because I'm a fish. All of this is new information, and in a better show this would have been seeded throughout the episode. So this all lets me see the vision of what the show was going for, but it's not fantastic still. It also doesn't make Noose Braca come across as much of a threat since Nala tricks him into leaving the ship and then Caleb beats him up in fisticuffs. Braca's second appearance is in episode 6, where the cadets take part in a training mission where they have to board an old shipwreck and bring it back online. This has apparently been done many times before by other students, but this time Noose is laying in wait with a trap and some Batmen to ambush the kids. This time he is the one that tricks Nala into thinking she needs his help, and I much prefer this version of Nala and Braca's relationship, where they begrudgingly have to work together, and she has to compromise on her morals a bit to do so. They even have some witty repartee that's not half bad. They are both award-winning actors after all. That is until it comes to light that this was all part of Braca's evil, big-brain plan to steal some nukes from Starfleet, and you realize just how convoluted his plan was, and how many things had to go exactly right for it to work. Terima ultimately saves the day when she tears out her implant and uses her newly found psychic banshee scream to murder all of the bat aliens. Because bats, so echolocation, so sonic noise, so psionic scream. Once she realizes the power that was in her all along that her father was holding her back from. The last time we see Mr. Giamatti is in the finale after Caleb has reunited with his mum. We have another moment where everyone thinks Starfleet is the most important thing ever, because Caleb wants to run off with his mother that he hasn't seen in 15 years, but Darum and Genesis just call him a quitter. Doesn't matter anyway, because they all end up back aboard the Athena, where Braca once again just beams himself on board to tell them all how he has surrounded the entire Federation with an array of nukes that he stole in episode 6. Please don't think about how many nukes he would need to do this in 3D space, because it's a lot, and your head'll hurt. And the writers didn't anyway, so it doesn't matter. Just enjoy this 2D map where they're fenced in. Since the Federation are all locked away behind a wall of mines, no one can use their hyperdrive to come help the Athena. There's yet another insane reference to another Star Trek show. RK says, "What about the Discovery? can't it jump using the mycelial network? What? Again, sure, if you're a longtime fan, that might make sense. But I'm 9 hours into this show, and a character basically just said, what about Glip-Glorp? Can't he save the day by teleporting with his magic mushrooms? And the answer is no anyway, so it didn't even need to be included. The finale raises the stakes by blowing up the Athena in the classic sci-fi trope of blowing up the base at the end. But then it's revealed that none of Bracca's missiles actually hit it, and it was just a holographic projection the whole time, with the real ship and the cadets safe inside. But it does get our main crew of kids all alone so they can work out a plan to save the day using everything they've learnt across the season. Wait, they haven't learnt anything. And Tig Notaro is here. She takes over and bosses everyone around and fixes the warp core herself while treating it like a middle school teaching moment. So once again, the cadets don't get a chance to show any growth. It's worse than episode 1. Maybe the combined efforts of our 4 genius hackers can figure out how to disable all the nukes? Nope. That's spoon-fed to them by the Doctor, who is currently speaking in gibberish, but an offhand comment about how Sam and Genesis used to talk in girl code makes them realize he's actually been telling them how to disable the bombs the whole time. It's literally just Sam fixing Caleb's email filter again. The Doctor saying, don't cross the Rubicon with glue on your shoes, means crossing the Rubicon was an ancient military campaign, but also means they need to use Rubin particles and gluons to stabilize the nukes. All of these words we are just hearing for the first time ever in this scene. Man, writing sci-fi is easy. You can literally just make up words to solve problems that you also made up. So Sam plays an iPad game and shoots a frequency through subspace that just makes all the nukes inert. Low stakes. While the kids are solving riddles and playing minigames, the episode is cutting back and forth to Noose Bracca, who has captured Captain Arche and decides to literally put the entire Federation on trial in a philosophical kangaroo court. This is a televised, high-minded, incredibly forced debate about the systematic hypocrisy and colonial ethics of Starfleet's so-called utopia. Sometimes it's actually kinda good. Like, it's not great, but I do salute them for not resorting to the conclusion being solely a big space shootout with some sci-fi jargon saving the day. Nala was never going to win against Noose because he doesn't play fair, but then they do something so incredibly dumb. In this last episode, we learn all about Noose Bracca's origin story, in which he claims that he grew up poor on a strontium mining planet, and then his whole planet was wiped out by the Federation. But what?
What?
How is that a reasonable thing to think when the Federation has never bombed a whole planet like that before? It has never even been alluded to them doing something like that. Like, surely it was possible from a writing standpoint to give him an actually good motivation, but then they make it worse. It's already unbelievable to us that the Federation would wipe out his entire planet. So is he lying, or does he really believe this happened? He seems sincere, and it turns out he is sincere. He thinks. At this point, Caleb arrives to help argue the Federation's case because he used to hate Starfleet, but now he has friends, so he loves Starfleet. He gets here on the broken Athena by using Tarima's magic powers like a dowsing rod to home in on Caleb's mum, and then they just fly in the direction she points, I guess. So how do they defeat Bracca? They prove his motivation is wrong and all his followers abandon him. In the style of this show, of course, this isn't figured out by Caleb or any of the cadets using knowledge that they obtained from StarFleet Academy. Oh no. Nala figures this all out on her own and then spoon feeds it to Caleb until he finishes her sentence.
What color does strontium burn?
At least for the last few hundred years, has always been blue or green, not red.
They dismantle this deeply held, traumatic worldview that drove a man to galactic terrorism with a brand new, never-before-mentioned chemistry fact. Nala explains to him that Bracca's dad actually ignited his own planet's atmosphere with a homemade weapon he fired at a passing Federation ship. Their atmosphere was high in volatile strontium, which burns red, whereas Federation weapons and fire burn blue or green. Boom. Villain defeated by trivia. This show is set in a literal school. They had an entire season of classroom scenes where they could have easily seeded this exact detail about chemical reactions. A 5-second scene in episode 2 of a teacher explaining that Federation fire burns blue and strontium burns red could have made this a decent payoff, where we, the viewer, figure it out before the characters do. Instead, the writers just pull off a completely unearned gotcha out of thin air to instantly psychologically destroy the season's big bad. It completely robs the trial of any of the actual philosophical weight they were going for, and replaces a complex debate about colonial ethics with a cheap textbook technicality. So, where does this leave Starfleet Academy? It was supposed to be the perfect entry point for a newcomer, a show specifically designed to pull in a fresh audience. But instead of the promised Hogwarts in space, We got bargain bin sci-fi plots, knockoff high school tropes, and cheap melodrama. They had award-winning actors, a legendary sci-fi universe, and a blank check to do something genuinely new, and they squandered it. The ultimate irony is that the studio apparently agrees this experiment was a failure. News has now broken that the show is getting a second season, but is officially cancelled immediately after that. It is honestly the most fitting end possible for a series that never wanted to commit to its own premise. Wonder if all Star Trek is this bad.